All right, Peter. So here we are again. I want to bring some this as we talked before and as we both know. If you were to condense the whole fourth way into a writing that you can inscribe on a pen, yeah. So, and actually, somebody did that to me. When I was younger, somebody gave me a pen that was engraved this, which is the essence of the fourth way teaching, as that's the method, that is the path, and that is the destination that will be encapsulated in this term from Gurdjieff: remember yourself. Yeah, remember yourself always and everywhere. So this concept or term or practice or state or self-remembering can be looked at from different points of view depending on our own level of being and consciousness. But I would like to explore this a little bit more with you. And I know you gave it a lot of thought about it, and not just thought, but we both try to apply it and then tweaked our understanding about it. So also, I just want to put out here also because I found out later that this self-remembering had different etymologies or different roots. So there's this called Atma Vichara, Atman, Atma Vichara, which is could be translated as remembering Atman or remembering the self. Other translation will be, instead of remembering, will be investigation. So self-investigation or self-observation. Other translation will be self-remembering. Other translation will be self-abiding or self-resting. Yeah. And I think they all carry some aspect of this self-remembering. So I want to throw this in there. Also, another idea to throw into the mix is that although it's not so popular these days, this term self-remembering, it's very popular, this idea of mindfulness, like being mindful, cultivating mindfulness. And Eckhart Tolle became very popular, and I love Eckhart Tolle, and talking about the presence and being present and being present to the now and all of that. So I would like to discuss and explore self-remembering while linking to this also mindfulness. Thich Nhat Hanh, Zen master, Vipassana, talk about this mindfulness of breathing, mindfulness of energies in the body, as well as being present to the now. Yeah, so linking all of this. And I know it's a big area, so it may take a long time. So, so what's your, now after all these years, your best understanding, or let's say starting as a beginning definition about self-remembering, or anything that you want to go about this to tackle the subject, Peter? However you want to go about it, and take your time.
One way to approach it is that we can look at it on a horizontal line. Self-remembering, what does that mean in the moment, in time, as a person, now, in the present? What is self-remembering? And then we could also examine it in a vertical way. What is self-remembering relative to consciousness or awareness? Because when we say self, that can be misconstrued as this self trying to remember itself here. And that's valid. That's valid on one level. And then there's the self, which is not a self of awareness or pure consciousness, which doesn't remember itself by trying to remember itself. The way I experience it, understand it, is it realizes that it is here. It self-realizes. And you could call that, that is self-remembering, but then it is no longer remembering. Yes, it is self-being, you might say. So what is self-remembering horizontally? That's how we usually approach it, or we did in the fourth way. That's how Ouspensky introduced it. He devised the concept of divided attention when he learned about self-remembering from Gurdjieff. And many people, especially many people we know in the fourth way, use that model. And it's really a model for the mind to be able to conceptualize what self-remembering is. And so, for example, you know this, ordinarily I look at a tree or a house or another person, and my awareness is sort of collapses out of itself, and it collapses into what I'm aware of. And it's almost like not a grabbing, it's like I think of it as a collapse. Awareness disappears from itself, from its own awareness. It collapses into other things. Those other things can also be thoughts or emotions or sensations. And so in that sense, if you think of it horizontally, there's the object, whether it's a thought or a person or a house. And here's me, well, let's just say me for now. And instead of awareness just collapsing, and now all I see is my hand, and holding my hand, instead, as Ouspensky said, there's now divided attention, or you can think of it as divided awareness, or you can think of it as dual awareness, which then becomes one awareness. Now there's a hand, there's awareness of being aware of the hand. Now I'm here as well as there. And in fact, in right order, I would be here first, always, and then go there. So send my attention on an errand. Send awareness on an errand of attention to look at my hand. But awareness stays here too, always. Now the mind can think about that. And then when it does, or even when you experience this awareness I'm speaking of, the mind will then say, oh, now I'm aware of both. Well, now that has just become something in the mind.
It's a thought,
yes?
now, yeah?
It's become a thought, exactly. It's become a thought or a sensation, even. You can kind of have a sensation related to that. But I think of it like this too. Let's say my awareness normally collapses into my hand when I look at it. And it's like there's a sphere around my hand. And the awareness goes, it gets sucked into that. And that's really what identification is. Identification means that the awareness goes out, it attaches to the thing it's looking at, and then it establishes some kind of identity in the object. And it may be an identity of me, my hand, or it may be the hand. Look at the hand. The hand has an identity of its own. And so self-remembering is already trying to be less identified with what we're aware of. And that's an important aspect of self-remembering. Self-remembering and identification are kind of like opposite sides of the same thing. The less you're remembering yourself, the more apt you are to be identified. The less identified you are, the more apt you are to be self-remembering, or the more available self-remembering suddenly is. It's very close if you're not identified. So if self-remembering might also mean that I said there's a sphere around my hand or around the house or around the person, if then the awareness is also here, now suddenly it's like there's a sphere here. I'll call it a sphere of awareness. So now there's two spheres. Here's Ouspensky's model. divided attention, divided awareness, dual awareness, however you choose to call it. And then that is very different from what most people are experiencing most of the time, as you know. Most people are enamored, fascinated, caught up in, engulfed in, entrenched in whatever it is they're aware of. And this awareness here is always so close, so available, and yet it's missed, it's overlooked. All the awareness is going there. So what if instead of my awareness collapsing into what I'm aware of, what I'm aware of collapses into awareness? This is very different. To be in the world and to have everything collapsing into awareness. I mean, I won't say any more than that. That's enough, I think, to get someone interested in experiencing it, but not with thought. That's I've also just introduced another concept, really, but in the actuality of that, this is the idea in the fourth way of impressions and why impressions are food. It's not that you go out necessarily and get the food and then eat it. It's that you are now here and everything comes to you as awareness. Everything collapses into awareness and then enriches awareness.
So if I can...
Anyway, that's... Yeah,
okay.
Please.
Well, I just want to slow down what you're saying and kind of explore this. So, because it's a lot of content here that you said that's very important and subtle. Also, as we talked in previous talks, in the normal state of humanity or normal state of man, without doing any special work or any awakening work, awareness work, the second state of consciousness, which is the normal state for humanity, but from the point of view of what's available in terms of consciousness awakening, consciousness development, the second state is kind of a zombie. You're like a zombie from one angle. So in the second state, the natural state of affairs is that the attention or the awareness is, as you call it, is like lost in the experience somehow. The movie or the beautiful woman or this politician that pisses me off on TV, or like, or I'm lost in thoughts, these thoughts, worries and daydreaming and imaginings and worrying that how people will perceive me and if I said the right thing and maybe they're upset with me and rehashing all this, So in the second state, basic awareness is all the time loses itself in an outer object or inner object. Yeah, could be like negative story or a sad story or an embarrassing story or an emotion. Yeah. So sticking, collapsing, you use collapsing. So basically awareness loses itself or is collapsed. So somehow, so it seems like self-remembering is somehow the opposite of that, is an attempt to correct the situation and to diminish the losing of oneself. So obviously we are not monks here, so I need to pay attention to the screen. I need to pay attention to the CEO. I need to pay attention, but I'm not fully lost in it. Yeah, I keep something for myself, this divided attention. So it's more like I'm aware. So here we are saying like some aspect of self-remembering. I'm aware of phenomena instead of being lost and in past or future. So I'm in the here and now, aware of phenomena, but also aware of the sense of being, or the aware of being aware of.
And this can only happen in the present too. This is the link to the present, that you can't remember yourself, so to speak, in the past or in the future. You can see memories, you can anticipate in the mind and all that, but yes.
Yeah.
Also the term, it's interesting, this term self-remembering, which Gurdjieff either borrowed or adapted or whatever, as you were saying earlier, but that this idea of bringing awareness back, you could almost call it self-recalling. When a company recalls a product, they bring all the products back to the company. There's a recall. So it's sort of like self-recall. Bring all this awareness back to its origin, back to itself. Recall it, remember it. That can mean, as I've heard you say in one of your videos, it means not only remember, but you see the mind says remember yourself, as though the mind is remembering the self. Yeah. That's no. This is just a term, a label for awareness actually recalling itself and realizing itself again, that it's here. It's here. And it also can be, as you've said, putting it back together, putting all these parts of awareness that have collapsed in all these things, bringing them back, putting them back together here.
Yeah.
They can still, awareness is so overlooked and it's so miraculous because it can spread itself, it can expand and never lose itself in its own expansion if it's conscious of being here. But it's only then when it becomes identified, it means that it turns into identity, or turns things into identity, into forms that it gives identity to.
Yeah. I was saying, actually today, I was talking to some people and I was, trying to correct this, as you said, this, if I can remember the number that my home phone when I was a kid. What can I remember that? It's 411414. The self-remembering is not like that. Self-remembering is more like, there depends how lost in forgetfulness we are. I think that depending how far out there at sea lost we are, the self-remembering is different. The way we return or how we return is different. So one way is that, let's say, I am driving and I'm thinking about these things and I'm worried about maybe somebody didn't like me, somebody's upset with me, and I'm having this like a whole story basically while I'm passing a few stoplights and I'm miraculously there's no accident. And then suddenly there's like whoa, I realized because somebody told me, hey, watch out for this daydreaming, and it's just notice and return. So I'm like, I am now kind of pulling, I'm ungluing from the imaginings, which were like some loops. And this and I'm back into the present somehow. And suddenly I see the traffic and I hear the music, and maybe I'm back here-ness, not knowing, like not knowing, but knowing. That's some form of self-remembering, although it's not full self-remembering, but I'm now at least with attention in the present, as opposed to the no attention and the attention out there. So yeah, but now what? Now I am here. I'm not daydreaming. So this is an important step. We can't go from the daydreaming to the consciousness remembering to be, remembering itself. So there is this coming back to the present. I'm kind of, how do you call that in this sports? I'm throwing back at you.
The ball's in my court.
If there's no attention, if there's no attention, even this term self-remembering doesn't mean anything. Also, if I don't know what the self is, then what am I doing? And for a lot of the time when I was young, talking to you, I didn't really understand what the self was. I didn't. So therefore, the self-remembering I was engaging in was some kind of mindfulness practice for me, as a come back from imagination into the present and then be aware of some things in the present I was aware of the sounds and aware of the body and aware of the breathing, but I wasn't aware of being aware. Yeah. So there's this important distinction. How does it land on you? Or you know what I'm
Yes,
referring to?
I do, yes. And something you just said made me think about it. It provoked a new thought I haven't really had before, and that is that, we don't really come back to the present. This is also a interesting reality. We don't. It's not like the present is always here, and then we leave it, we disappear, and then we come back. It's more really that awareness comes back to itself. And then what we call the present is in focus again. Somehow, because this idea of we come back to the present, it also implies time and space. We went somewhere over a duration of time, and in space somewhere, internal space, into the psychological world. Usually we're swimming off somewhere. But in a way, when we come back to the present, really awareness is just coming back to itself. And it doesn't have to travel any distance or any time to do that, to experience that. This is when we get into the vertical aspect of self-remembering and of conscious awareness. It's something altogether different from time and space and even the moment, even being in the moment. This is a popular idea too. Well, I'm living in the moment now. I'm in the moment. Well, interestingly enough, present is not in the moment. I mean, awareness is not in the moment. The moment is in awareness. It's hard the mind can't kind of sort this puzzle. And it is a puzzle to the mind, but in actuality, to awareness, when you're in that dimension of awareness, it's very obvious. And but now we're getting into something else, because we're talking about, here's the surface of our awareness, or the surface of the ocean. Let's say below it, it's like the ocean, and then that would be the second state of consciousness according to the fourth way, as you know. And then below that, the first state of consciousness is sort of like the bedrock under the ocean, and that's very deep sleep and very deep dreaming, although dreaming also can happen at the very bottom of the second state. And then in here, in the second state, that's all the imagination, the results of identification, how the effect that has on the eyes, the four centers, the body and the mind, the sense of me, all of that is in this second state.
Yeah, the selfing, the egoing dynamism.
Yes. And this is awareness identified with something in the body or the mind, but the fourth way calls the four lower centers. It's attached to that, and it's attached to these eyes, these thoughts and emotions that are circulating for various reasons, which is another discussion. And then what self-remembering means in this context is simply awareness coming back to the surface. And I say coming back, but just a moment ago I said it doesn't come back. But, words get in the way, right? So let's say it comes back, you swim back to the surface, awareness does. It stops being interested in all this, and it realizes, why am I entangled in all that? What is that? And then you even see this identity, this what we call the ego. It's kind of moving around, and it reforms itself all the time based on what it's attaching to. And then, so awareness says, let go, and it lets go of all those weights, and it comes back to the surface. And now you're at the surface, and now you want to swim along the surface of this here and now, what we call the present. So you make this effort called self-remembering, and you simply try to stay right here, seeing and hearing and feeling what is going on, and being aware that you're aware of all those things. It's not you being aware. Awareness is aware of Peter and Mihai having a conversation right now. And so but now I said this is all the lower centers, the sense of I, imagination, daydreaming, inner considering. Negative emotions is a big part of this ocean.
Mm-hmm.
But now, what about the sky, which would comprise the third state of consciousness in the fourth way model?
Mm-hmm.
So from the surface of the ocean up into the sky, that's the third state of consciousness or dimension of awareness. The body cannot go there. The mind cannot go there. The ego, the sense of I, cannot go there. That is the realm of pure awareness. Most people are, living their life, their sense of I and their awareness is right below the surface. It's boom, 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 have cereal, make toast, go to work, do my job, talk to my friends.
Worry, not good enough,
worry,
victim
get irritated.
is not
Yeah.
fair. So there's all this
all that.
torture.
Yeah. All of that's happening down there. So at the surface, it's possible to realize, wait a minute, there's much more than that. And I lost my thought, but that there's this third state, and it's pure awareness. And then according to the fourth way, there's even that's like the sky. Above that it's like outer space. That would be the fourth state of consciousness.
Yeah.
The only thing that can travel, let's say, those realms is this thing we call awareness, consciousness. Yeah. And what happens is awareness can be aware that it is in the second state even. You can know you're identified. You can know that you're daydreaming. Yeah. You catch yourself. You're in the second, you can be aware of that. So there's a dim awareness in there. Awareness is down here too. But now suddenly it becomes more conscious. It's on the surface. And now suddenly it becomes even more conscious. It pops it pops out of itself in this dimension, and it pops into this dimension of itself, which is also itself. It's all really awareness. And it's just, it's all really awareness. And so then it can, at some point, this is getting ahead of ourselves, it can pop out of the third state of itself, of its dimension as awareness, and suddenly realize itself as yet a higher dimension of itself. An example, you think, okay, I'm daydreaming. Oh, stop daydreaming, remember yourself. And then you start trying to remember yourself. And you're succeeding, you're here, you're staying here, you're not falling into the thoughts. They're there, they're swimming along, but you're not jumping into that stream, you're not swimming with them. Then you realize, wait a minute, how do I know that I'm trying to remember myself? Who knows that? What knows that? What is aware of that? So oddly enough, there's also an awareness of us trying to remember ourselves. This sort of opens a new door, there's new territory now vertically in our being and in our life. We're not just a dot traveling along the surface. We're now this sort of this vertical awareness of being now sweeping across, if you will. And then it can go even beyond that, where awareness can realize you see, this is the curious thing about this thing we call awareness. It can always be more aware of even itself. And it can just keep expanding. But that's getting ahead, as I said.
Yeah.
This thing about self-remembering, you asked me, what is it? Well, it's hard to explain because self-remembering can happen on the surface of our ocean, of our being, trying to be here now, dual awareness, all of that. It can also mean this highest dimension of awareness where the thoughts are swimming, the emotions are vibrating, the body's in a state of tension or anger or whatever, doing its job. And this pure, silent, quiet, that's how many people describe it, still awareness, being of awareness is just there watching. It's almost like it's back here watching, or around here watching. Watching isn't even a right word. It's aware. So awareness can pop out of the second state. It can then pop out of even the effort to remember yourself. This is very powerful, what I just said. It sounds like, oh yeah, wait a minute. It can pop out of a dimension into another dimension of itself. And it's actually in a different dimension. It's a different world that awareness is now not occupying, but which it is. And it's just realizing itself as that higher dimension. And then even more, as I say.
Mm-hmm.
So when we say remember yourself, this can mean many things at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And it can mean different things for different people, depending on how they
Yeah.
understand and how they have, quote unquote, experienced
Mm-hmm.
awareness.
Mm-hmm. All right. So many bones you threw here for the dog, or balls. So, yeah, I think self-remembering, depending of the current where we are at and our understanding about the self, it means many different things. So when I was young, and I was talking to you when I was really young, as I said, I didn't know what I know now, which I know now, which is more like experiential knowingness after 20 years or something, that awareness is also, we can define it, that's the thing, because awareness, I like this definition. Awareness is that whatever it is which is hearing these words right now, and it's also it's real. Awareness is that which is real. It's not an imagined. It's something real, whatever that is. It might not even be a something. So it's like an aware reality, that which perceives, sights, is aware of sensations, is aware of thoughts. Yeah, so that is what we call awareness. And in this terminology, it's good to clear this thing that is like some special mystical, is like, oh, this special awareness that I need to reach or something. We are talking more like it's called dog shit awareness. One of my teachers would say, like, it's like conscious contact. It's perceiving. Yeah, consciousness is the perceiving. Also, it helped me to not refer to such things as nouns, like awareness, consciousness, presence, the self. All these are nouns that gives the idea that there's like a something. Yeah, so like a something, like a computer, like a sensation. Yeah, so it was helpful at some point to hear this pointer that, hey, look at like a consciousness or awareness more like awareing or awarenessing or consciousnessing. This might not be like a something, it's like it's a happening. In the same way that, like, say, the ego or the, and I really like in the fourth way, they don't call it ego so much. All these many eyes and state of sleep creates an imaginary picture of myself. Yeah, the imaginary eye. Yeah. So even that, I mean, I find it useful not to call it ego, but more like egoing or selfing. Anyway, so we have this definition, and in what we are talking here, just for the clarity sake, awareness, consciousness, presence, true nature, the witnessing, they're all synonymous. We use them synonymously. Yeah.
Yes.
So coming back to my point, when I was engaging in self-remembering in my 20s, I didn't understand what I understand now. What I understand now is that there is more here than this voice and this thought and this feeling and these sounds. There is that which is aware, was here all along when I was in my mother's belly, is here now, whether it's aware of itself or not. It's here. It's something, there's more. Yeah, actually, the fact that I see, hear, and sense, and I complain about this suffering, it implies that there is awarenessing of it. Yeah, everything we perceive, it's a testimony that there is the perceiving. Yeah, this awareness. So now I know.
Simply because we couldn't know it was happening without awareness being there.
Yeah, it's the perceiver in chief, the perceiving in chief, the where Francis used to say, Francis of Sales, it's where the buck stops, where, the ultimate perceiver, it's not the I, it's not the brain, it's consciousness which is perceiving through the I, through the brain, through the all of this. So
You could even say, Mihai, you could say that awareness hears the ear hearing, and it sees the eye seeing,
Mhm.
and it feels the hand touching something.
Mhm.
So I say that because awareness is always, actually, I think it's fair to say always, one slight step beyond whatever the mind conceives it to be. The mind responds and it reflects these perceptions we have about awareness, immediately transcribes them into a conceptual thought, an idea, model of what that is and what it's. So we have to be very vigilant.
Mhm.
Awareness has to remain vigilant and see this is just inevitably something the mind does. It's how it operates,
Mhm.
and it's how it sort of ensures that human beings will hold a sense of identity in the four centers and in the what the non-dual teachings would call the body and mind.
Mhm.
But,
Mhm. Yeah.
but I interrupted you there. I don't know if
Yeah,
you remember
no,
what you were
I
gonna.
remember. Yeah, I was saying that now, um, and of course, we are doing the best we can to use this conceptual framework. We are straining our intellect, but me and Peter, we love doing that. We've been doing it for a long time. But so we are straining the conceptual power of the intellectual center to put into words the unutterable for the purposes of clarifying some things. But as Lao Tse
And the
would say,
mind, this intellectual center, all the centers, they can never go above the surface of the second state.
yeah,
They can do remarkable work, but they actually cannot go beyond that. This is also important. Important. This
yeah,
is also a critical realization. No matter how much you engage the mind, no matter how marvelous your mind is, it can never get out of the ocean. It's like you're under the water and you can swim. You can make an effort. And effort is really just what is it? It's a concentrated focus of energy in the four lower centers. So
mhm,
we concentrate our energy, we focus it, and then we do what's called making efforts. You want to learn how to ride a bike, you have to make an effort. If you want to do push-ups, right?
mhm,
You have to focus your attention in your moving center and even your instinctive center and make this effort. If you want to learn a new language or learn how to type, you have to focus the attention in one or more centers. But um, what did I want to say? That okay, I was using the analogy. You're underwater. You have to make an effort to swim to the surface, right? And that's a right effort of the mind.
mhm,
But it's the mind that is making this effort because really, when awareness realizes it's in the second state, so to speak, all it has to do is realize itself. It's immediately it's at the surface at least. It doesn't actually swim to the surface. The
mhm,
mind turns it into this idea of I must swim to the surface. I must get out of the second state and swim up to the surface.
mhm,
And then when it gets on the surface, it can make the mind and the body can make an effort to swim along the surface, right? But there's no effort they can make to swim into the sky.
mhm,
It's impossible, just like
mhm,
it's physically impossible for us to swim into the sky.
mhm,
You can swim from below to the surface and you can swim along the surface.
mhm,
Only awareness can be in that dimension, that third state, that third level of dimension of consciousness, the dimension of itself. It's not like awareness enters another dimension and the dimension is something that awareness enters. No, that is awareness.
mhm,
That actually is awareness. It
mhm.
is the third state of awareness or of consciousness, as the fourth place is. And mindfulness, you mentioned mindfulness earlier, Mihai, that to my experience, I don't want to dismiss mindfulness. I know it means a lot to many people, but I see mindfulness as being a focus of attention really in the second state and on the surface. And the word, it says mind. The mind you're being mindful of. And it often has the connotation of being mindful of something. You're aware of something. So you're mindful. I'm mindful of my thoughts. I'm mindful of my actions. I'm mindful of other people's feelings. I'm mindful of the environment, and so on. It's all second state. But on the other hand, I think it's true to say that being mindful of mindfulness is divided attention. It is self-remembering, said in another way. However, you need to understand, if you're practicing mindfulness, that awareness doesn't practice mindfulness. The mind practices. In fact, awareness doesn't do any practices. All practices are really the mind trying to get to the surface and stay at the surface. To allow awareness to pop into a higher dimension of itself.
Wow, hang on, let's stay here, Peter, for a moment. And don't throw new balls at me because I tie together here. Actually, this is what I was, first of all, the mind cannot become aware of awareness. Another metaphor they use often in non-duality, yeah, we want to tie in some non-duality because they all speak about some universal truths, like the mind trying to, or the small me, or the sense of me, the uninvestigated sense of me, the in the fourth way is like Mihai, the Mihai, Mihai trying to become aware of awareness, or the mind trying to become aware. It's like a character in the movie trying to become aware of the screen. That's never going to work. It's that dimension of the screen is unavailable to John Wayne in the movie. John Wayne cannot be aware of the screen, and in this metaphor, only the screen is aware. It's like a magical screen, yeah? So in this metaphor, metaphors break down, but imagine that there's the screen is aware. It's aware of being itself and is aware of John Wayne and all the other drama on the screen, yeah? But John Wayne cannot be aware of the screen. So I'm coming back to this because now I know I had glimpses and realizations, experiential, not just mental, that there is presence, there is awareness here, which is ongoingly, and the thoughts and feelings are appearing in this awareness, all the eyes, and they come and go, but there is presence is primeval. This awareness is the constant, yeah? So, and that is what is the self, that which perceives. And of course, we can explore later, not now, what's the nature of that perceiving presence, and realizing that it might not be personal. It's not personal at all. But anyway, yeah. But when I was 20, I didn't know any of that. So actually, I was doing some mindfulness, Peter. I was trying to do self-remembering. And what I was doing was like this. I'll be aware of the screen. And then I knew not to lose myself in the screen, not to be identified. So I'll be aware of the nose. I'll be aware of my nose and be aware of gesticulating, aware of my hands. I'll be aware of the sound of my voice. I'll be aware maybe of energy in the chest. I'll be aware of sounds outside. And I will be in this kind of almost forceful efforting. And also I had this misunderstanding that thoughts are a problem. Any thought is a problem. So I'll be watchful. As soon as there will be a thought, I'll be like, Voop. They'll be like, oh man, I'm not happy in this relation. And so I'll be in this constant trying to stay in the present, aware of content, but I wasn't aware of the sense of being. So that was some kind of effortful application of attention, of mindfulness. So I was doing mindfulness. I was aware of content, yeah, aware of objects. And, but that, which from one angle, it is a better state in terms of possibilities than the one when I'm churning, lost in negative thoughts and feelings, and I'm totally checked out. Yeah, the state of being attending to the present and being mindful, that's a state with more possibilities. But self-remembering is more than witnessing content. It's witnessing content and witnessing the sense of being. And here is tricky, Peter, because actually I heard some older students in our spiritual community. There was somebody who had the reputation of being awake a long time ago, not the teacher, but he was talking, he was saying, hey, be aware of awareness. This is the ultimate, being aware of being aware. And I remember, Peter, that I was like, yeah, that's it. That's what I need to do. Me as a Mihai, as the spiritual practitioner ego. So I was trying to now be aware of awareness. And I was trying to make it happen. And it was like, it's almost like a dog that you are like, huh? Which had a function in some way because it would jar me. But I didn't understand the fact that awareness is invisible and you can't, anyway. So basically, awareness is the only thing which you can't pinpoint. So it's very tricky to be aware of awarenessing, because it's like being aware of the invisible man.
Yes, the mind cannot be aware of being aware. Sorry?
Yeah, so yet we are talking about this a lot. So I'm concerned,
yes.
Other people are going to, again, do some mental fuckery that doesn't go very far,
Yes, but at the same time, that's kind of necessary for each person to discover that mistake, fall into that trap, and be lucky enough, let's say, to realize that they're in a trap. They have fallen into a trap, because you're right. The mind thinks, well, then I, Peter, will be aware of being aware. It's really more an inducement from the mind to awareness, to say, be aware of being aware. It's almost the mind saying to awareness in a helpful way, such that awareness becomes aware that it is there, that it is here, that it is awareness. That's what it really means. But we say, be aware of being awareness. Isn't this beautiful? We can keep peeling off and going deeper into deeper layers of all of these ideas. Of course, the most central one, that the hub that all the others tie to, this thing that cannot be described, this awareness that's the most obvious thing about existence that gets completely overlooked. How could we possibly know creation exists and we exist as part of creation if something was not aware of that, and aware of us even thinking about it? Yes. I also wanted to go back to something you said a moment ago, that that famous analogy of the screen. I would propose there's also another way. That's a valid metaphor. I would propose an extension of that metaphor, which is this: that John Wayne on the screen, Peter on the screen, Mihai on the screen, is actually, it's like the film is there. And what's happening is this film is being cast onto the screen as an image. And I would propose that the screen is actually the mind. And it's the backdrop. The mind is actually the backdrop against which all of these images are cast. And awareness is the light coming from the projector, passing through the film and projecting, literally, that's the word, projector, projecting the image onto the screen where it appears real.
Mhm.
And this happens inside us. You can see this inside us, the movie inside, where an image is being cast all the time onto the backdrop of actually all of our centers, 4 centers, but particularly the mind, because that's where the sense of I coalesces and establishes itself. And so we can see inside there's a backdrop against which all of these images, and you can literally see what you mentioned earlier, your imaginary picture of yourself. And it's an interesting word the fourth way has chosen, your imaginary picture, like the imaginary film cast on of who you imagine yourself to be.
Mhm.
What's interesting, you know this too, I'm sure, the more you see that image inside of that feeling of me,
Mhm.
the more you see how disparate it is, how different it is from the way you actually are as a
Mhm.
person in the world, or
Mhm.
even looking at your image on the video. Whoa, is that me? Because it's such a contrast. Because we actually impose this image
Mhm.
onto ourselves,
Mhm.
and it's no more than that. It's no more than an image. But it also relates to something I was going to say that, you know, when you were doing all your trying to be aware of awareness and when you were younger and doing all these things, I remember I was about 16, 17, and I read about astral travel. And I thought this, you know, this, and it became popular at a certain time. And one of the techniques they recommended in the book, and I would do this, sit on a chair in a room, try to visualize yourself getting up out of the chair while you're still sitting in the chair, walking across the room and looking back at yourself sitting in the chair, which is interesting. I
Mhm.
recommend it, by the way, as a technique, although it's just a technique, it's just a practice, it's just a visualization. But in my experience, in fact, that is what happens when awareness is conscious enough and in a high enough dimension of itself, it can actually look at the physical body and it can see the person doing whatever the person is doing. And to me, it's almost like it never gets all the way around here and looks, but it's kind of like right here. And it's kind of like looking, or it can kind of look around. Who knows? Maybe if it gets, maybe at death, if awareness is really, really conscious and survives, it'll be a full blown frontal view
Yeah.
of this person who had lived, you know. But so just as you can kind of peer around internally and see your imaginary picture of yourself and get a good look at it. In fact, yeah, you can do the same. Actually, it can happen in the physical realm. This can sound like imagination. It can sound like voodoo. I don't want to suggest that, but it just goes to say that awareness is much more formless and much more um, expansive, not as a thing, but as awareness. And it can get outside, realize itself outside of a negative emotion, realize the negative emotion is inside of it. I am not in
Yeah.
depression. I'm not in anger.
Yeah.
Anger is in here. Depression is in here. Anxiety, whatever, it's in this
Mhm.
internal world of the body and of the mind. And awareness is not in it. Well, both of those are in our awareness.
Mhm.
And as you know, particularly with the work you do, that realization can change a lot. It can change the triad, the
Mhm.
dynamic, the chemistry of your internal world.
Mhm.
I say all that back to the beginning of why I was saying it is the idea that awareness is the light.
Yeah.
But this is just another version of the same analogy. You can see the screen as the backdrop of the mind, all
Mhm.
these eyes and the sense of I being cast onto that background of the mind. And that light is doing nothing. It's just being light. It's
Mhm.
just being awareness. But that casts
Mhm.
these images onto the screen.
Yeah, it's interesting. The metaphor, I think Ramana came with this metaphor in as there will be the silent movie started to appear. So
Ah,
he saw a silent movie, you know, and then,
interesting.
you know, and I can see that technology changed because with what Ramana Maharishi saw, there was indeed this light projecting these images on that screen. Yeah. Now we have IMAX, So let's say you take the IMAX, it's like, yeah, so it's like a different idea, but yeah, basically
Is there anything,
called this, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to ask you, is there anything that you asked me about self-remembering? And I said a number of different things, looking at it from different angles, like a vertical, a horizontal, internally, externally, that, it can be even be a physical effort initially to be here now. And then, but it can also then become a psychological effort. And then it becomes metaphysical when it's in that third dimension. Anyway, of all the things I've said, is there anything you would add or modify? Or I know you have been doing that along as we've been talking, but I wanted to ask you directly. If we were to go back to the beginning, and I was going to ask you your question, where would you start?
Yeah, I want to tie it back to this,
See, it's not so easy, your questions, Mihai.
Yeah.
To answer them.
Yeah, because, as we answer this, we can open to other ideas that are big ideas. And the fourth way is very architectural and systemic, and it's all connects with everything else. But yeah, I want to come back to this, self-remembering. In which way is it different than mindfulness? And is mindfulness useful? And then what about effort? Yeah. So basically my point is that if I am at the stage of my inner exploration where I haven't had a glimpse experiential that there is this presence, that this is here, and this presence is that which is aware, and this presence is hearing my voice and his voice, and this is what I am. This is what we call I. I is that, so if one didn't have this experience, like experiential glimpse in a Zen, like a Satori or something, a little, and so if it is this doesn't make sense, or it makes sense intellectually, but it's eluding, and it's elusive, and it's like trying to stabilize and catch the invisible man, to be aware of it. So if that is the case, then you can't you can't do it, basically, which is okay. But still, there are many things that one can do to become more conscious and to become less asleep. So that's why actually in the fourth way, the Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, they offered, hey, yeah, of course you are not remembering yourself. You don't even know that you don't remember yourself, and you can't. So we know that already. So, but what can you do? So they say, well, work on this, work on that, observe this, observe that. So in the fourth way, we are told to, okay, I know we are asleep in the second state, but what you can do is to observe certain type of sleep, meaning there are certain type of manifestations, which are some type of mechanical, automatic, unconscious manifestations or habits of attention or ways of being relationally or with oneself. And when that is happening, that is bad. You are very asleep when that is happening. So you are going to become more awake if you catch that. Just catch it and drop it the best you can. Yeah. So from this point of view, if I'm not clear what the self is, it's still, I recommend this Eckhart Tolle, Thich Nhat Hanh, attempt, which in the fourth way will be to diminish the time one spent in daydreaming, to observe this daydreaming, especially the one it's about me and past and future somewhere else, or about, the one that is not practical. So I'm saying is that, hey, it's not that thinking is bad. Thinking is okay. I can think about the next project I'm going to do, or I can plan my vacation, or I can, Peter is a writer, think about the book. That is fine. I'm talking about this endless stream of constant churning, imagining about me, past, future, worries, sense of lack, commentary, narration, judgments. That is the egoing. So what we can do is that whenever we catch ourselves into that, it's like, oh, wow. And to somehow return in one step, at least to what is here, in terms of what's more real than imagining is the birds, there is, the sense of the current experiencing. Yeah. And come to a state of being less in conceptual, less less in the thinking, conceptual thinking, and come back more like to sensing, hearing, being, feeling the breath. That although we don't know what the self is, now we are more in the here and now. We are always in the here and now, but we were sleeping in the here and now. Now we are a little bit less sleeping in the here and now. So yeah, diminishing the trance. Yeah. And so that is helpful. And also from the point of view of also processing pain body, and from the point of view of not getting identified with negative emotions and transforming negative emotions, processing trauma and all of this. It's hard to do all this if we are asleep. Like Gurdjieff said, no work can be done in sleep. So from this point of view, it's good to be aware of the inner body, make a habit, because that's what I didn't have when I was in younger. I wasn't quite aware of the inner body, where all this, the emotional body, the instinct, anyway, the emotions, sensations, energies, triggers, all of this, they are in the body. So kind of not be just either lost in visuals or lost in the mind, to be more like observing what's happening. Yeah. If you can't remember yourself, observe what's happening in the now. And train yourself also to be aware of the inner body, because most guys, we are like numb, shut down. It's in the thinking only. So to notice these knots, currents of energy, and try not to change them, not to get rid of them. And also, from one angle, it's a more enjoyable life. I mean, it's much more enjoyable life, because we are suffering with what's not happening a lot of the time. Yeah, I'm suffering now with what happened or what may happen. So by having this coming back to the present, consciously aware, we are diminishing the unnecessary suffering, and we are more enjoying, like let's say I'm going to a museum, I'm going to the Louvre for 4 hours, which is a metaphor for this life. I can just walk through it like sleepwalking and thinking about my mother-in-law and thinking about this, and I miss the whole Louvre, right? So I'm saying, hey, okay, you don't know who the self is, that's okay, but can we just attend to what's happening here? That's already a higher step. Yeah, because if there's no attention, if the attention is scattered and fragmented, then it's hard to abide as the self. That's why I think you are familiar, in Buddhist Vipassana, before they do any exploration of anything, they want people to be aware of the breath for like 3 days only, to concentrate, to have concentration. We can't go from scattered, no attention, to wise insights. First, we concentrate attention, and so I would still recommend this: observing the thinking, the feeling, the sensations, and to, when there's daydreaming, to come back to the present as often as possible.
You know, it makes me think of how meditation can be wrongly interpreted or misused,
Yeah.
misconstrued, and that is, awareness can go and kind of sit right in the middle of the second state and meditate. It's really the mind just sits there and it watches everything going on around it, all the thoughts, the feelings, the body, as you suggest. And that's not the purpose is not to simply just to be aware of all of that and resolve your relationship to all that, as I experience it. The purpose is to use everything you see, and this is where self-observation comes in. You know, the fourth way talks about there are two pieces: self-observation and self-remembering, and putting the two together. So self-observation is really observing all of these things and using all of them as a catalyst or a lever, as leverage to realize you can observe it. And that immediately brings you back to the observer. So anything you can observe. And so you can use these, okay, observe your thoughts, but the purpose is not to just see the thoughts or undo the thoughts or drain the mind of thoughts. The purpose is to see them, and through seeing them, realize you're seeing them. So everything becomes like a lever. Whew. Okay, and then the same thing in the external world. And I think the essence of Zen shares in common the same essence of the fourth way. And that is, you live your life, you carry wood, you chop wood, you carry water, you fix dinner, you go to work, you put on your socks, whatever, and you just do what you're doing, and you are aware of doing it. But it is not for itself. It is the means to the real end of being aware and realizing you're aware of it. And that's also the power of now, the beauty. It's the same thing. Now, it's always now. And this is why coming back to the now is so valuable. This is where all the levers are. All this leverage is in the now, both internally and externally. And so, but you can't come to self-remembering without realizing that you haven't been remembering yourself. It's actually an aspect of self-remembering. It's just it's the rudiments of self-remembering. Same with identification. You can't really discover what it means not to be identified, and how not to even, I won't say let, but so that identification doesn't even begin. You can't know any of that unless you keep finding yourself identified. So you have to keep backing out. You have to back away from everything you perceive. You have to back out of identification. You have to back out of realizing you didn't remember yourself. As expensive you say, that is self-remembering. That's the first thing Gurdjieff said to him. What more do you want? When he said, I'm trying it, but I realize I don't remember myself. He said, that's it. What more do you want? And that's where, and so the other thing I think is, we cannot make the next dimension or the next level of awareness happen. It actually happens by itself. You just try to be aware. You try to be here right now as best you can, right here, right now, always doing whatever you're doing. Awareness, oddly enough, will take care of itself. And it's like a bucket of water. Most, as we are, and then the system would say, men number 1, 2, and 3 mean people who are like buckets, and the water is constantly coming into the buckets, but there are all these holes in the bucket. And so the water is just going right out. And the water, which is, in this analogy, is awareness, never gets to realize itself as water. And so men number 4 would be like people who learn how to plug these holes. Now the water can start to fill up in the bucket. And the water, wow, I'm not the bucket. This the awareness realizes it's the water. It's the awareness in this bucket. And yet when that's happening, it still kind of is relating itself still to the bucket, that water. Then a certain point by itself, by virtue of filling up, it spills over. And now it's spilling out into another dimension. And then it starts to realize itself out there. It's no longer in the bucket. It's, wow, now it's starting to fill up in another dimension. And
Yeah.
then the same thing at another point. And this is the idea of crystallization in the fourth way, the idea of, the formation of the astral body, these other things. But it's simple. I like the bucket idea. It's very simple to see that all we have to do is just keep being aware as much as we can. Try not to get too identified. Try not to fall too much into this mental associative thinking and daydreaming, and keep coming back to this simple awareness, and it will take care of itself. And then suddenly, at a certain point, it will start to overflow, and it will recognize itself in a new way, a more expansive way, and it will realize there's yet another dimension to discover itself as. And then when you're in one dimension looking at a lower dimension, it looks very different.
Yeah.
As I know you know. So these practices of the fourth way, self-observation and observation of impressions, it's actually the same thing. It's also leverage. Everything, Gene Klein used to say this, everything you see points back. It's a pointer. It's reflecting back actually to awareness. You could not perceive it were it not for awareness. So everything is doing, it's pointing back. That's true in the inner world too, if we're not identified. When we're identified, we become those objects.
Yeah.
And very much so. It's, what did Gurdjieff say? A man doesn't realize it, but he becomes, I forget what it was like an ashtray or something.
Yeah,
becomes
like
identified.
More intense form of identification with people have.
Yes.
Hashish is that they realize I am the pipe.
Yes. Anyways, yes.
But so hang on, give me a moment here. Just a moment here. So again, if you had glimpse of realizing that there is this presence, there's this presence of awareness, that is what I am. So some people had that. They went to satsangs, they whatever, they've done a lot of work, or they had a psychedelic journey, or like they were hit with the 2x4 over the head or something, and there was like this, it's like somehow awareness was shocked into waking up to itself, or like a beautiful moment, sometimes even for people who are not interested in awakening, like a shock, an accident, or a beautiful thing just suddenly turns off the mind, and it's like so vivid that temporarily and unknowingly the soul is awake. And we say soul, spirit, awareness, all same. Yeah. So, but yeah, so if you had that, people had that, or somehow what I mean by self, as being the consciousness, that which is aware, that is the true identity. So if that somehow is graspable with the spiritual tongue, not with your mind, yeah? So then self-remembering is like, hey, come back to that as often as you can, as often as possible, like coming back to becoming aware of the sense of one's own presence. And obviously you are aware of other things too. So returning to that and actually cultivating that, because also some people, many of us, we had this, or in the non-dual world, they speak about, hey, you had a glimpse. Okay, it is great. Just, so we can we stop there. We had a glimpse and now we think it's over. It's not over at all. It's just the beginning. It's the actual beginning of the path. Even they say that the beginning of the real path is once we realize that I am not a man, I am this aware presence. So I'm not a person, I am this consciousness. Then actually that's the beginning of the path. Anything before then, it's the path to the path. Yeah. So if one had that, then still using this fourth way to abide, that would
I
be
would say it's almost like the path to the edge of the cliff, and then it's off the cliff. How do you intuit how to keep jumping off the cliff as awareness?
yeah.
Anyway, please continue.
Now,
Sorry.
if again, and many of us, most of us, or they are still struggling with that, or it's a little conceptual, or that's not available. But doing this, observing oneself and diminishing daydreaming and staying with the attention in the present, also meditating in that way that Peter, I agree with Peter completely, that the highest form of meditation is to consciously, knowingly be aware of this being that we are. Yeah, it's not about witnessing thoughts or about anything. Yeah, it's not about manipulating, attaining, changing. It's not. Yeah, it's that's the highest form of meditation. However, witnessing thoughts, watching the breath, noticing sensations and not resisting them, staying globally, like Jean Klein would say, la globalité, the globality of the presence and being open to the three realms, which we should bookmark here, Peter. He was like, be open to the mental perceptions, the bodily stuff, and the world. So just attending to this and not trying to reach anything, somehow mysteriously, if we are honest and interested, the static will quiet down. There will be less mind. It will quiet down the veils and the daydreaming and the energies, so we can temporarily experience a quiet body mind. From a quiet body mind with some skillful inquiry, it's easier to become aware of the aware background. Yeah, so we can't actually, if the mind is very busy and we are full of emotions and triggers, it's better to kind of do some work to purify this, basically, to clean up the machine a little bit, to get more grounded, more, it's too much static. If the sky is full of clouds and storms and thunders, we can't be aware of the sky. So doing some practices to have the sky more, less overcast will help. Yeah. But again, this comes over and over. Depends where we are. This effort will be useful to take you further. At some point, the effort is different. The effort changes into some non-effort. And I want to, without opening too many tabs, but Peter said this. This third state is not the ultimate goal. This third state of consciousness is like when consciousness wakes up to itself. Somehow I am conscious and I know that I am that. So there's self-consciousness.
That's how the mind describes it. Yes, I am conscious, and I, of course.
Yes.
But
yes. That's how.
That's a description based on a reaction that the mind has due to the influence of awareness, being more conscious.
Yeah, I'm aware that there are big limitations about this, and the Tao that can be put into words is not the real Tao, and the highest teaching is that we should be just silent here, and anything we say, it's already the lower teaching. Yeah, but my point here, Peter, is that this self-remembering is a practice that can lead to the actual state, and that is not the final goal in the fourth way. There is another dimension which is unavailable, which is the fourth state, and The fourth state, it's more like what I think people in non-duality, they talk about the fourth state, where this thing like, I am everything. Everything is me, and everything, I'm nothing and I'm everything. And the realization that not only that everything is connected, but everything is a one. I am that, and it is groovy, you know. So basically the fourth state is more like everything is that, and wherever my eye falls, I see the face of God. But this has thoughts, yeah. It's like obvious, like, oh wow. So everything is awareness, everything is reality, and it's like nirvana or whatever. It's like super juicy. Everybody wants it, and we are trying to get it because then we are going to feel very good. So in the fourth way, what I appreciate is that they say, dude, it's not practical for you to think about that, to think about the fourth state if you are in a second state. So the way to go towards this oneness, realization of oneness, and realization that Atman is Brahman, that this presence is God, it can only go through first self-consciousness, you know, through this grokking, this self-remembering and deepening into that, and having more frequency, duration, and depth. And ultimately, it's not going to be an effort anymore. It's going to be like, you know, what used to be an effort 3 years ago becomes like no effort, you know. But anyway, my point was that we are focusing a lot on this self-remembering because that's the station. If we are interested in all this, what, you know, harmony, peace, undisturbability, the sense of okayness, fulfillment is going to be, we have to go for the third state of self-remembering and further. And many teachings, they are skipping this. They are taking from being asleep to oneness, and that doesn't fucking work. And I appreciate, you know, that Gurdjieff was realizing this, and he didn't want to talk too much about the fourth state because he would say it's not practical. It will just make you have more imaginings. So let's deal with your next step and also with where you are now. Before you go to the next step, we need to realize that we are now asleep, basically. Anything you want to say on this or kind of capitalize on this?
It reminds me that another thing that Zen and the fourth way actually have in common, but that is misunderstood. There actually is no goal. Mm-hmm. There's no goal. Awareness will expand of itself. It will become more conscious, aware. It will, quote unquote, do that. We don't do that. And so the goal, if you want to say there is a goal, it's just what we were talking about earlier, being here right now, doing what we're doing, seeing it, what we're doing, using it as leverage to realize we're seeing it. By virtue of simply being aware. And that includes, of course, not identifying with whatever we see. Nothing. And that means, and that's like that's the vibration. Identification is kind of like this vibration of awareness when it attaches to things, and then it loses itself. So non-identification is like a calm thread of awareness going to whatever we're looking at or experiencing inside. It may be agitation, but the awareness is there's this calm, silent tether thread that sees it. But when we are not identified, that actually changes what is seen. Modern science even knows this. On a cellular level, a microscopic level, simply a human being observing a chemical reaction can change the reaction.
Yeah.
It's inexplicable. There's a name for it. I don't know what the name is, but
In quantum physics, the
yes,
way
in quantum
it's
physics.
changes the experiment.
And that's very much at the heart of the fourth way and at the heart of self-remembering and self-observation. Doesn't mean change anything. Doesn't mean trying to quell the eyes. It means seeing the eyes in a condition of agitation and not identifying with that. Recalling awareness to itself away from its attachment to what it's aware of. I wrote down here two other things that I thought would be worth mentioning. And that is, if we do what we're doing now, if we just are always here now, whatever we want to call it, whether it's the mind trying to be aware, trying to self-remember, whether it's actually this awareness we were talking about, whatever it is, it will by itself, by virtue of being aware, the bucket will start to fill. When the time comes, it will overflow. Now, sometimes a teacher will come along, let's say, and throw a big brick in the bucket, and the water will splash out, and the water will realize, wait a minute, there's more than just the bucket. There's another dimension of.
Yeah.
Or it might come and just pour the whole bucket out. Or I'm just thinking here out loud, having fun with the idea, but that part will take care of itself. But this other thing you said about meditation is related. Because if you meditate, and let's say you're physically in an agitated or something state, and you want to calm the body, you're trying to calm down what's going on in there. Well, the same thing if your thoughts are racing in the mind, you kind of want to calm it down. Well, actually, this is where I tie in the idea that every center, the four centers, the mind and the body, if you want to look at it that way, they have a structure. They each have a structure. And then all these things we're talking about are going on in those structures. When we identify, what happens is we innervate the structure of the centers. Awareness actually enlivens them, vivifies them in a wrong way, in an unhealthy way. It identifies with them and it kind of gives its fine energy to the structure of each of the centers. And then that starts to create havoc inside. So you have the mind as a structure. Inside the mind are these thoughts and emotions. When that structure starts to get electrified almost, you might say, as a result of identification, then the thoughts and emotions do the same. We make the mistake of trying to go in there and calm down the thoughts and calm down the emotions. To me, meditation, you said the highest form of meditation. To me, meditation is about becoming as aware as you can of the structure of the mind, not of what's in it, what thought, sort of calming down that structure, just normalizing it. It's like putting your hand on someone who's afraid. You just awareness just kind of calms the structure of the mind. That in turn calms down all the motion or the noise. Yoga is the same thing. The highest form of yoga, it's not about being flexible. It's not about achieving a posture. It's not about how long you can. It's not about getting hot. It's not about it. Esoterically, spiritually, at its highest, yoga, I see, is about calming the structure of the body by means of the influence of awareness. If you calm down the structure, then the rest, all the movements and all the sensations in the body have no choice but to also calm down because they're being driven, housed, fueled by the structure in which they are. This to me is what chanting would be, or prayer would be for the emotional center. Mm-hmm. That's really what that is. But it's misunderstood, it's misused. Yoga, again, I've already used that example, and meditation, which relates more to the mind often. No, don't try to calm your thoughts. Actually, they say try to calm your mind. It's there, but it's missed. It really does mean that. Try to calm the mind. I think it's Gene Klein suggested, try to feel the brain inside your head. Mm-hmm. Try to be aware of your brain and just this thing in there. Mm-hmm. That can actually calm down the brain. And it seems to me too, the work you do, trauma, is what happens is the structure of the center gets kind of shocked by something bad or negative or harsh or intense. And it either damages the structure or it leaves a residue, like scrapes and scars, and it leaves that residue. And then that causes all these distortion, further distortion of eyes and thoughts and emotions and sensations in the body and in the mind. And that healing work is not so much necessarily about, although you're more the expert in this, I'm just saying from my perspective, not necessarily let's go in and fix all the problematic eyes you're having about this. Let's see if we can't heal the structure. Where is that wound? Where's that scratch, that dent? Or where's that residue? Can we do something to allow it to heal itself, the structure? And then the contents of it will. Anyway, I say that I went all the way from where I started was this idea of meditation, the highest form of meditation.
No,
Not about the contents of the centers, but about the structure of the centers. And people often overlook the fact the centers exist by themselves and their contents are something else.
Yeah, so here I want to say something also for people listening to this. So if words like the centers and all of that, the intellectual center, it doesn't make sense to you, so we are going to have a talk and we are going to present this in the fourth way is a very important teaching of in detail describing this body-mind mechanism, both the hardware and its software. So we are going to go into that. So Peter touched on that. And so, but yeah, now you are touching on this, the benefit and the mysterious power in the dynamics of witnessing. And by just witnessing something, it changes. And there's this story of Buddha that Buddha was traveling with his disciples, and there was this man who seemed pretty tortured and restless, and had a stick, and there was in some creek, and he kept stirring the water with the stick. And Buddha was looking at him, and he was like, "Oh, what's going on, my friend?" And he would be like, "Well, I lost my ring, and it's just all this mud. There's all this mud, and I'm trying to settle the mud in order to find the ring or something." And Buddha was like, "Oh, why don't you try to just sit here, my friend, and don't try to quench the mud with the stick, and just witness and allow the agitation, the mud, and then it will clarify itself." So that's a very important principle of fourth way, as well as awareness-based teachings. Like in the fourth way, they will say, "Hey," because when we observe something in ourselves, we start to observe our ego, we start to observe our lies, our deceit, our contradictions, our pettiness, our stuff that we don't like, So the tendency is to, now we are more awake, we observe this and we are like, "Oh my God, this again. Oh man, I'm such an asshole. How can it be like this?" So we witness a little bit, but then we pop off witnessing and we have judgments about what we witness. And now we are getting identified with this judger, and we think that this is the one is witnessing, but no, I am now bamboozled. So in the fourth way, they had this thing like to observe the phenomena, to observe even your personal phenomena as a interesting, curious stranger. Like, oh, that's interesting. So not to judge it, not to be upset with it. And especially this is very tricky with patterns. Let's say if I have a pattern, or if I have a pattern that creates suffering for me and others, like of lying or of hiding or of being judgmental and gossipy or whatever. And then I watch this, and then I watch it like 60 times in like 2 weeks, and I'm like, God, what's wrong with me, you know? So here it's very important to train oneself to observe impartially. And in the non-duality, they would have this. I mean, in the tradition of Jean Klein, Francis, Rupert, to observe this stuff with benevolent indifference. So don't get involved. Don't get involved with the observation. Like, don't stir the thing, you know? So that's really super important, especially as we get more conscious and we notice yucky, terrible psychological stuff. Yeah. And this,
Can I say something
yeah,
there, Mihai? What you're saying is it's so interesting because this is how I experience it. Awareness will see something about my imaginary picture of myself. It just sees it. Let's say it's something not pleasant, like lying or something, or dodging somebody trying to say, I don't know, something like that, or a negative emotion, and it will see, there's Peter getting irritated again, whatever. What happens is awareness sees that. Yes, the perception that awareness makes reflects off of it, and as it comes back, it influences the mind. The mind then reacts to the perception. It's sort of like it goes bong bong bong. And so then what happens is you were trying not to identify with that, and then the reaction the mind had to it gets engaged, and you then identify with that, and you say, "Wow, that's terrible." You then are identified with your reaction, which is coming from your imaginary picture of yourself. And so that actually becomes a rich fuel, rich material, raw material for observation. That almost becomes more interesting than the thing you saw. Right? And so this whole idea of being aware and transforming a negative emotion, let's say, there's raw material and it creates this, and then this goes, I'm so angry, or I hate myself, or whatever. That is what you study when you see that, and then eventually you see the operation of that thoroughly enough, deeply enough, it poofs. And now you're just left with that original. You're not identified, you just see that, and that becomes this like direct fuel, direct energy, direct pointer back to awareness.
Yeah.
And so it's, you can say, well, try not to identify and then don't judge yourself. Well, wait a minute, don't judge yourself. Who's judging you? Awareness is not judging your actions. Your imaginary picture of yourself, when it gets wind of the fact that awareness has seen it, it's what reacts, and it's what judges. Judging is we could do a whole talk on judgment. Anyway, I just wanted to say that because the goal, there's no goal, but the goal is not to not react to seeing yourself. The goal is not to make it better or to try to be happy instead of irritated that you are a jerk. No, it's always self-observation, self-remembering. It's always leverage, whatever you see. And if something happens, then there's a reaction in you to that. You see that, you use that as leverage. It's almost like you're stepping up to back and back to awareness. And so all these things become, it's just we're so attached to this familiar feeling of me, of I inside, that we go right there all the time. And then of course we even think that's what's trying to awaken, even though that's not what awakens. But I really hate this. I hate all my negative emotions. I hate having to do all. I just want to awaken. That's also just an I, a feeling of that.
And we are going to also go into talk about these very important concepts which are relating to some reality. This is the many eyes in the fourth way, is that basically part of the self-observation is to observe these many eyes which come from these different centers, and each one of them, every thought, it's like, oh, I'm cold, oh, I'm hungry, oh, I miss her, oh, I'm so much better than them, oh, I'm not good enough, oh, all of these are impulses that in a state of identification and state of being more asleep. Consciousness is identified with each one of them, and that becomes the me. But as you know, Jesus would say, like, hey, your name is Legion. This is not just for people who are possessed. This guy's possessed and is possessed by many demons, so that's why it's Legion. No, there was more like esoteric knowledge about us that when there's not self-awareness, every impulse becomes the boss for a moment and becomes I. And part of the work is to observe the many eyes, observe these impulses. And we are taught that actually none of these many eyes, every thought, feeling, sensation, and we are going to go into this another talk, none of this is real I. Just as actually Peter said this before, it's like, there's this feeling, we have this feeling that this feeling is me, that I am in it, and actually this is Francis Lucille used to have this pointer, was very helpful for me with dealing with something like that. There's no me in the feeling is in me as this aware openness, as this presence. There's no me. And he will say even, don't be the slave of the me in the feeling. The feeling is in me, So in the fourth way is like, hey, observe the many eyes. And even it's more than that, understand how they are created. And anyway, it's a whole spiel that we are going to read. Observe them. That which is aware of the many eyes is actually the real I. That which is aware of the many eyes is the real I. It's just that it's unaware of itself. So we are trying to basically.
And then there's a subtle trap too. Then there's a subtle trap too, where that perception also reflects in the mind, and the mind then says, I am what is aware. I am now aware. That's not awareness. That's a reflection of the perception of awareness in the mind. The mind then establishes a sense of me and then says I, because real I is not an I in the end. At the same time, however, that's what I think I know that's what Ramana Maharshi was doing. He was saying, just keep trying to look at I am, okay, who am? Keep looking at I am, and then it will not fall away immediately. It has not one part, it has many parts. And until you can separate from the whole apparatus, I call it a hologram, psychological hologram of I, of me, and it's in here. So you can see all of it, you're not out. But it always tries to appropriate the pure perceptions of awareness. The mind appropriates all of that and tries to take ownership of it and create identity out of it. And it's not like the mind is this entity that's doing it. It is a mechanism in our construction as a human being. That's what happens. All these perceptions reflect and echo and bounce, and they get stuck in places. And awareness is the realization that all of that is happening actually in response to awareness itself. Mm-hmm. And so all of those things actually bounce back to awareness if we don't identify with them. Mm-hmm. It's lovely talking with you.
Yeah, it's been long overdue. We used to do this a long time ago, and we have a lapse of like 15 years, so we need to catch up. I just want to, before we wrap it up, just to so this, finalizing some of the things you said. Also, you said about trauma. Yeah, so kind of training ourselves to observe without judging and without whether it's good or bad. Actually, Peter gave this example, or we gave this example that I'm witnessing. I mean, there is observing happening, and then I'm observing something which is unlikable, And then it's like, oh man, God damn it, I have this again. I thought I worked on it. I thought I'm done with it. God damn it, what's wrong with you? Yeah. So now that is an I. It's not awareness. So I got, but there's another type that can happen like this. Let's say one is making certain efforts and the mind is more quiet and there is more conscious presence happening. And then the thought will say, oh, wow, that's it. This is it. I am that, or I am enlightened now. I went to some meditation retreat with my friend, one of my friends, our common friends. And I remember it was like, we meditated for 14 hours for a long time. And it was hard and terrible. But after days and days, and also no TV, no talking, no books, no, was like really artificial conditions that were very supportive for extra, conscious effort. So I remember after about 5 days or so, it's like the mind got really quiet. And I for the first time became aware of these things that, David Hawkins were talking about, the context, the aware background, so observe the thoughts, all the thoughts, the many eyes, the sensations, the judgments, if they are not too many, and if you are conscious enough, you will see that they are popping up like bubbles in this aware openness or in something. The thoughts, they bubble in a something that is awake. I knew about that, but it was theoretical. So after meditating for so long, something happened. And so it was obvious to me. What happened is that the mind quieted down so much, and the busyness and the franticness and everything. So it was just like quiet, but it was not just quiet. It was aware quiet, was what David Hawkins would call the aware silence. And he wanted us to be devoted to the quality of aware silence within. But you can't notice the aware silence if there's like all the time busy, Anyway, so after 5 days, it was like that. And there was a wonderful, and it also was staying for a long time. And then I remember that in the night, I'll have a thought. I was like, oh, I would have all these thoughts, which I wouldn't witness that. I would land on those. That's what Scott Killaby, you are doing this work and then you are landing on something, So I'll be like, oh, wow, this is it. Oh, yeah. Oh, I wonder if I'm going to lose it. I wonder if it's going to still be here tomorrow. So again, the personal me kind of getting involved now. So remember that I will wake up the next day and I'll be like, it's still here. So somehow my spiritual ego was involved in all of this and taking credit. And then after a few more days of that, I started to go into like, oh man, I attain enlightenment. This is it. So then I started to imagine telling Adi Ashanti about this. And so I was having all these hours of like how people will appreciate that and how I'm going to be seen as more special. And my usual false self now was, so Jean Klein says this, you know it. He says that the ballerina dances, the ballerina being the soul or presence or conscious work, yeah. And then she bows. She finishes dancing the ballerina, and then the clown comes and bows for the ballerina. In the circus act, I think they usually have this. There will be the ballerina, and then the clown comes, and he's taking the credit, he's taking the applause, but the clown did nothing. So it can take this form like, oh man, look at you, you are so terrible, you will never wake up this lifetime, you are such broken. Or, oh wow, oh, it's going good, I'm close, I'm there, oh, I'm enlightened. So basically any voice that we hear, it's not it. Basically something is aware of it. So we need to be, the spiritual ego, we have to be careful about that. Also coming back to trauma, Peter, yeah, you're right. I'm doing exactly that. I'm slowing down the process for people, and I am attending them. I am with them in a way that is loving and friendly and welcoming. And I'm helping them to become aware of the so-called trauma, which is a cocktail of intense energies and intense resistance to these energies, and there are memories, and there is a meaning. It's a cocktail of intense energy trapped, resisting it, thought, memory, meaning, that it's like very hot. And so I'm trying to have them witness it little by little without trying to analyze or do anything about it. Just help them witness little by little, each one of them, in a way that's tolerable. If I feel like that they can't handle it, meaning their nervous system or their witnessing capacity shuts down, and now they have a little resistance, I back out from it and do some form of mindfulness or pulling them out from that to get them more stable in the nervous system, and then we look back at it. So, but ultimately, I'm just having them witness it slowly, and in this witnessing, that discharges. And there's a little bit more, we need to question certain meanings that the person made at that time, or the child made a meaning that, so we need to question those and to do some more stuff, but it's just the creating the safe container for this unpleasant stuff to be allowed and witnessed,
I would say something you mentioned before too. Try to, like, if you were advising people who were interested in this, you said try to observe, just try to observe what you see and try not to judge. I would add to that, just try to observe what you see and then observe the judgment also, which applies also. Observe the eyes which think I can never awaken. I'm such a jerk, such an idiot, I'm stupid, whatever. Observe that without identifying with it. Likewise, observe the eyes that think, this is it, I'm there, I'm awakening, I'm awake, I'm conscious. To observe that, to just keep observing, and then what it becomes too is, then what happens too is that when we observe, it cannot help but happen. There develops in us a sense of I that is also observing all the other eyes, but you can observe that too. And in the end, it's whatever you can observe, as we used to say when we were together in a fourth way school. It was maybe the theme of the teaching from one respect, and it was, whatever you can observe is not the observer. So if you can be aware of something, by virtue of the fact that you can be aware of it, it is not awareness. And so this is how awareness keeps popping into another dimension of itself, popping out of one dimension of itself into another. And it's true even when even in those higher states, there are still things that happen that cause a reaction in the mind, like visions and sensations and whatever. And this simple fundamental rule still applies. Observe it without identifying, without attaching to it as a thing and as you in relation to that thing. Ultimately, to be not identified is to have, there's no identity, and there's no relationship to anything that gives me or gives awareness a sense of identity. You can only have that kind of in relation to things, in relation to people, in relation to an experience. It's always establishing, the mind is always trying to establish some kind of relationship to things. And so that's what it's not to say, okay, don't establish a relationship to anything, but ultimately that's what awareness is in its purest, most unidentified condition. It is completely detached but aware. It doesn't push things away. It doesn't reject anything. It doesn't try to change. Nothing's good. Nothing's bad. Things are just there. They are the way they are. You see something about yourself, part of your mind judges. You want to congratulate yourself one day and punish yourself the next, and so on and so forth. You think you're doing it. You're a special spiritual warrior. You are a slum. You belong in the slum with all the other terrible people who can't awaken and will never awaken. All of that. So it comes back. If you can be aware of it, it cannot, by virtue of that fact, be awareness. And the mind can become an ally in this. It can become kind of a mental discipline that can sort of come in. And it's almost like, let's call it a friend of awareness.
Yeah.
In the mind. And it can say, awareness, be aware of being aware. Don't, it's like a go-between. It's like a first assistant to the CEO who does some of the dirty work so the CEO can maintain the big picture. This ties back to the idea in the fourth way of a steward and a deputy steward and so on. A real good steward in a household is there to make life real for the owner, for the master.
Yeah, so, and we'll bookmark these ideas of what talk about. These are some kind of stages that the conscious presence goes through, so to say, which from one angle they are pedagogical.
And how the mind adjusts itself accordingly. Because at each, let's say, heightened level of awareness, the mind is really extraordinary, is it not? Because it can also adjust its thinking to a higher, deeper perception. It has its limit. It can never go beyond a certain limit. It has a ceiling. It cannot go beyond that. However, within its own realm, it can be amazingly flexible. It can adjust in a way that aligns with awareness and supports. And this is the best, highest use of the intellect and also of our emotions, which is comprised like our emotional attitudes. There can be this emotional attitude of like allowing for awareness to be itself.
Yeah, I kind of noticed, you probably noticed too. So I working with people who are starting to apply these ideas, but they are more like in discovery stages, and they are kind of just having a little light enough to be horrified of what's happening in the basement, So yeah, it's natural. Initially we become more awake to what's happening, and then we are horrified. So watch out for the trap to not judge. I mean, to observe the judgments. And Suzuki would say, Suzuki Roshi, is the state of being where we don't stick to anything. That's the aim of our practice. We don't stick to it. What I noticed that as we deepen in this self-remembering, and as there is also a glimpse about the nature of that which is aware, as seeing that it's not personal, it's not personal, it's not male, it's not limited, is invisible, it's like a mystery, So, but somehow no longer believing things that I thought they are true, but they are no longer true, Anyway, so in this process, the mind changes. And it changes from mind being like a vicious dog, a dog that barks at everybody and barks at the master, it bites everybody, to this kind of dog, it becomes now the dog. So as affected by a high level of presence and deepening in the work, the dog of the mind becomes like a well-trained dog that is serving the master, and a good dog. How is a good dog? is like the sits, like in the medieval times. Yeah, it comes and follows the master all the time. It's not doing bad stuff. It comes and does things when needed and when asked. And then when master goes to his chamber, the presence, the dog, and it's the dog is basically doesn't need to think now. There's nowhere to go. Then the dog just sits, waiting for the master being consciousness, presence, to be needed. So when the master again goes somewhere, needs something, so the mind changes from being an enemy or somebody that creates turmoil and blocks us and hurts us. It becomes a tool. It's a useful tool, and also becomes less. What I noticed, there's much less mind, So at the initial stages of this fourth way practice, you will be surprised how you're like, oh my God, there's all this all the time. But later things will change, so they will be more naturally quiet. The mind will be more naturally quiet. So then it's easier to kind of explore natures of the presence, to be curious about the sky, and does the sky end, and what is the nature of the sky if there are less clouds, So anyway, I'm just giving a little bit of progression and a little hopefulness.
And that makes me think, Mihai, that in your analogy, how the mind can become like a more well-behaved dog that serves the master, that this change that happens in the mind is the result of the influence of conscious awareness on the mind. It cannot do it by itself. It can to a certain extent. And the fourth way is full of tools for thinking in a higher way that's supportive of awareness. But really, the mind cannot do this by itself in the way that we're talking about. It comes as a result of awareness itself. And this goes back to this we were talking about earlier, the chemical change that happens when you observe, just by virtue of being conscious of something. It changes. Mm-hmm. And gosh, there's so much we could say about that. Yeah. Like even when you observe, really become aware of a flower. It's anyway, I won't go there, but that the mind is actually very fluid and flexible by nature. It can, and you know this because it can twist itself into all sorts of weird, bizarre shapes and things. No, but it can also unbend and really become this supple, available, supportive conduit for awareness. And this is a beautiful thing. However, just to say again, it's the indirect result of awareness itself shining its light in the mind and on the mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I tried to work when I was younger, which is unavoidable, from my spiritual mind on my mind, to change the Mihai-ness, to change the me, so the me is more in a certain way. And so those efforts were deemed to failure, although it was helpful, and in all those attempts, but the mind didn't become quieter and become more useful function by trying to change it. It actually, I noticed that as I started to have actual glimpses and clarity about the consciousness, as I was working with Francis and getting deeper in that teaching, it was getting experientially clear about the witnessing and that which is aware. I was getting more clear. I mean, that which was aware was getting more clear about itself. And I would notice that the mind now will be naturally more quiet, not as a result of me doing a lot of exercises. Yeah. But this being said, it is useful to tame the mind, because if the mind is the boss in an unconscious state, then there's nowhere, we are in the prison. Yeah. So
also what I was saying is, also another way of saying it is, the mind is, awareness does not actually train the mind. It is the mind that is trying to train itself. All awareness does is be aware, shine its light on the mind, and that changes the chemistry of the mind and the workings of the mind. It almost as though the mind is all caught up in itself. And by virtue of awareness casting its light on the mind, in a way, this is just an analogy, of course, actually turns around and looks at awareness. It cannot actually see awareness, it cannot perceive awareness, but it's kind of like, wait a minute. And so instead of the mind doing all of its stuff all the time, it, in its own way, at its own height, it becomes cognizant of there's something else. There's it's awareness. I don't know. I can't ever figure out what it really is, but I kind of know it's there. And then the mind sort of almost by virtue of that starts to behave itself a little more, gradually a little more, and then a little more until it becomes this dog, this well-behaved dog. But back to the point that we can also watch the mind trying to work on itself, trying to develop itself, trying to train itself, trying to discipline itself, and so on. And again, we can see that happening.
Yeah.
It's like when you meditate to try to watch yourself meditating. That will change meditation right away.
Yeah. Well, I think that's been pretty rich for now, for this this session.
You don't want to go for another 2.5 hours, Mihai?
No. let's shelve it here, and there was a good beginning.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.